Before the first shot is fired, hunger can already be winning. In a ration line, a man collapses, not from wounds, but from weeks of empty calories. Starvation is one of the most insidious weapons of war, slow, silent, and relentlessly predictable. It is planned far from the front lines, in offices and councils, where food becomes leverage and deprivation becomes policy. Here, the invisible toll of hunger is turned into control. The decision to wield hunger as a weapon is made with cold precision. It is not collateral damage, but a tactic chosen with intent. In the late 19th century, during the Siege of Paris, food became a bargaining chip, a means to force surrender. The starving citizens, once vibrant and hopeful, now stood in long lines, their faces gaunt and hollow, embodying the grim realities of warfare. Hunger's effectiveness lies in its impersonal nature. It does not require the constant action of soldiers on the battlefield. Instead, it thrives in the shadows. The slow erosion of life through starvation is often overlooked, making it a preferred method for those who wish to avoid the immediate consequences of violence. The suffering it inflicts is quiet, yet profound. As hunger takes hold, the psychological toll becomes evident. Families are torn apart by scarcity, and communities fracture under the weight of despair. The decision-makers, insulated in their offices, remain oblivious to the human cost. They see numbers and strategies, not the faces of the starving, not the children whose laughter has faded into silence. The deliberate use of starvation as a weapon is not a new phenomenon. Historical records reveal that leaders throughout the ages have employed this tactic, from ancient sieges to modern conflicts. It becomes a calculated risk, where the suffering of innocents is weighed against military objectives, a grim equation that prioritizes strategy over humanity. In the shadows of war, hunger transforms from a byproduct of conflict into a weapon of choice. The architects of starvation understand the power of deprivation. It can break spirits without a single shot being fired. And here is the reversal. At no point does anyone starve by accident. This chilling realization raises a haunting question. When does strategy become an atrocity? The consequences of intentional starvation ripple through society. With each passing day, the toll mounts. Children grow weaker, the elderly succumb to illness, and once thriving communities dwindle. The invisible hand of hunger grips tighter, and the fabric of society begins to unravel, revealing the fragility of human life in the face of calculated cruelty. As starvation becomes a weapon, it blurs the lines between combatants and non-combatants. Civilians are no longer mere bystanders. They are integral to the strategy. Their suffering is not an afterthought, but a central component, a chilling reminder that in war, the most vulnerable often bear the heaviest burdens. In this grim calculus, hunger becomes a tool for manipulation. Leaders exploit the desperation of the populace, using food as leverage to maintain control. The act of withholding sustenance is a calculated move, transforming the basic need for survival into a weapon against those deemed adversaries. As the war rages on, the decision to starve the enemy becomes a chilling norm. The strategy is discussed in hushed tones, the moral implications buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. The suffering of innocents is relegated to the realm of statistics, a grim footnote in the annals of military history. The slow death brought on by starvation is often more effective than the swift violence of war. It is a method that demands patience and planning, where the enemy is weakened not by direct confrontation, but by the gradual erosion of hope and will. The strategy unfolds quietly, yet its impact is devastating. In this calculated warfare, the question remains, when does the pursuit of victory cross the line into moral depravity? The architects of starvation may justify their actions as necessary for the greater good, but the human cost is immeasurable. Where does strategy end and atrocity begin? As we delve deeper into the history of starvation as a weapon, we must confront the uncomfortable truths of its implications. The choices made in the name of strategy leave scars that extend far beyond the battlefield, challenging our understanding of humanity itself. What does it mean to wage war when hunger becomes the ultimate weapon? In the early days of conflict, armies quickly learned that the key to victory lay not in the clash of swords, but in the control of resources. Supply lines became lifelines, determining the fate of entire cities. A well-fed army could withstand sieges, while hunger would erode the will of the strongest. This understanding transformed military strategy, shifting focus from immediate battles to the slow, calculated manipulation of food supplies. Throughout history, cities like Jerusalem and Constantinople fell not just to swords, but to the encroaching shadow of starvation. As besieging forces cut off supplies, the desperation of civilians became a weapon of war. Food shortages turned once thriving marketplaces into ghost towns, where the echoes of barter faded into silence. The psychological toll of hunger became as devastating as any physical assault. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution introduced new dimensions to warfare. Commanders began to realize that starvation could be engineered with unprecedented efficiency. Railroads and supply depots allowed for the rapid movement of food, turning logistics into a strategic advantage. The ability to starve an enemy from a distance became a hallmark of modern warfare, where the battlefield expanded beyond the horizon. As the world marched into the 20th century, the horrors of the Great War laid bare the consequences of this new strategy. Commanders calculated the cost of lives against the benefits of starvation, viewing civilians as mere collateral in their grand designs. The rationing of food became a deliberate tactic, weaponizing hunger to break the spirit of nations. The use of starvation as a weapon was not confined to the battlefield. During the siege of Leningrad, civilians faced unimaginable choices. Each day brought the grim reality of dwindling supplies, forcing families to make decisions that would haunt them forever. The line between survival and surrender blurred, as hunger became a relentless adversary. As military leaders strategized, they recognized that the suffering of civilians could be a powerful tool. Starvation was not just a method of warfare, it was a means to control populations. The fear of hunger could be wielded like a sword, compelling obedience and quelling dissent. This manipulation of food became a calculated measure to maintain order amidst chaos. In the aftermath of battles, the victors often found themselves in control of not just land, but the very sustenance of the defeated. Food became a bargaining chip, a tool of negotiation that could sway loyalties and reshape alliances. The victors could dictate terms, leaving the vanquished to grapple with the consequences of their hunger. The strategic importance of food supply extended beyond immediate conflict. Nations began to view agricultural production as vital to their security. Farmers became soldiers in their own right, tasked with feeding armies and populations alike. The land transformed into a battlefield of its own, where crops were cultivated with the knowledge that they could mean the difference between life and death. As the world entered the era of total war, the consequences of starvation became increasingly dire. The civilian population was no longer seen as separate from military objectives. They were integrated into the calculations of war, their needs and suffering factored into the strategies of commanders. Hunger was now a predictable outcome of strategic planning. With each passing year, the understanding of hunger as a weapon deepened. Commanders began to recognize that the slow, insidious effects of starvation could achieve what direct confrontation could not. The psychological warfare of deprivation became a cornerstone of military strategy, reshaping the landscape of conflict in profound ways. The horrors of starvation were not lost on those who experienced them. As civilians suffered, their stories became intertwined with the narratives of war. The human cost of strategic planning was often obscured, but the reality of hunger seeped into the consciousness of those left behind. Their resilience became a testament to the enduring spirit of survival. As the war dragged on, the distinction between combatants and non-combatants faded. Civilians became pawns in a larger game, their suffering a calculated risk in the pursuit of victory. Starvation emerged not as an unfortunate side effect, but as a deliberate strategy, a chilling testament to the lengths to which leaders would go to achieve their goals. In this grim reality, the understanding of hunger as a weapon solidified. Leaders recognized that the power to starve an enemy could be wielded with precision and intent. As the act of war evolved, so too did the strategies that governed it, ensuring that the specter of starvation would linger long after the battles ceased. In the shadows of war, leaders convene in dimly lit rooms, calculating the impact of hunger as a strategic weapon. They believe that by starving their enemies, they can force surrender without the cost of direct confrontation. The absence of food becomes a tool of coercion, wielded with cold efficiency. As weeks become months, the calculations grow more precise. Rationing turns methodical, and civilians' needs shrink into numbers on a ledger. Leaders tell themselves it is necessary, controlled, efficient, but the truth is simpler. Food isn't gone, it's being withheld. Distance makes the human cost feel abstract. The besieged population, once vibrant, now faces the grim reality of dwindling supplies. Children, their eyes hollow with hunger, roam the streets in search of scraps. The leaders' cold calculations clash with the visceral suffering of those caught in the grip of starvation. As desperation mounts, the besieged begin to turn on one another. Trust erodes, replaced by suspicion and fear. Neighbors who once shared meals now hoard what little food remains, driven by the instinct to survive against the looming threat of starvation. Leaders rationalize their actions, claiming that starvation is a means to an end. They argue that the suffering inflicted will ultimately lead to a quicker resolution of conflict. In their minds, hunger serves a purpose, a calculated pressure that will yield results. The passage of time blurs the lines between military strategy and moral responsibility. As food supplies dwindle, the leaders remain detached, viewing the starving masses as mere statistics in their grand design. The human element fades from their calculations. As the siege stretches on, the rhetoric shifts. Hunger is no longer just a tactic, it becomes a psychological weapon. Surrender is marketed as mercy, and the victims are blamed for prolonging their own suffering. The logic is perverse: break or be broken. The relentless pressure of starvation takes its toll on the psyche of the people. Families once united by love and community now fracture under the weight of survival. The moral compass of society begins to disintegrate as hunger dictates actions. In the command centers, the leaders celebrate small victories, believing that their strategies are working. Yet, as the bodies of the starving pile up, the consequences of their decisions become harder to ignore. The distance they sought to maintain is eroding. With each passing day, the leaders grow more emboldened in their approach. They see the slow death of their enemies as a sign of strength rather than a moral failing. The logic of starvation becomes entrenched in their military doctrine. As the situation deteriorates, the leaders face mounting pressure from their own ranks. Some begin to question the morality of their methods, fearing that the consequences of starvation may come back to haunt them in ways they cannot foresee. The cycle of deprivation continues as both sides grapple with the implications of their choices. Hunger becomes a relentless adversary, shaping the course of the conflict. The leaders remain resolute, yet the specter of their decisions looms larger with each passing day. As the war intensified, civilians became mere statistics in military reports. In dimly lit offices, commanders calculated food rations, reducing families to numbers, their needs overshadowed by strategic goals. The human cost was obscured by spreadsheets and data. Children, the elderly, and the sick were deemed logistical burdens. In crowded refugee camps, mothers clutched their malnourished infants, their eyes hollow from hunger, as officials debated the allocation of limited supplies. Food distribution became a tool of manipulation. In besieged cities, leaders used rations to reward loyalty and punish dissent. Citizens learned to navigate a landscape where hunger dictated survival and compliance. The line between combatant and non-combatant blurred. Families were uprooted, their identities reduced to mere entries in military logs. Each meal became a transaction, a reminder of their precarious existence. In the chaos, the elderly were often forgotten. Grandparents, once the pillars of their families, now shuffled through ration lines, their frail bodies a testament to the toll of deprivation and neglect. As months passed, the psychological impact of starvation deepened. Communities fractured under the weight of hunger, trust eroded, and neighbors became wary of one another, fearing scarcity would drive betrayal. Amidst the turmoil, children played in the rubble of their homes, their laughter a stark contrast to the grim reality of their surroundings. Yet their innocence was overshadowed by the looming specter of hunger. The military's calculations extended beyond mere logistics. Entire populations were viewed as leverage, pawns in a larger game. Civilians were forced to bear the burden of strategies they did not choose. In this grim calculus, the suffering of the innocent became a silent weapon. Food scarcity was weaponized, and the cries of the hungry faded into the background of military objectives. As the war dragged on, the concept of humanity was redefined. Civilians were no longer seen as individuals with stories, but as mere resources to be managed, their lives dictated by the whims of those in power. In the face of such dehumanization, small acts of defiance emerged. Some began to share what little food they had, forming secret networks of support, reminding each other of their shared humanity. Yet with each passing day, the struggle for survival intensified. The balance of power shifted, and the consequences of starvation rippled through communities, setting the stage for further conflict and desperation. In the shadow of war, hunger becomes a tool of governance. Rations are distributed not just to sustain life, but to manipulate loyalty. Those in power wield food as both reward and punishment, creating a fragile balance of compliance and fear. As the conflict drags on, the government tightens its grip. Families are forced to choose between loyalty to their leaders and the survival of their loved ones. The hunger gnaws at their resolve, reshaping their allegiances. In this climate of desperation, neighbors become informants. The fear of starvation drives people to betray one another, as whispers of dissent are silenced by the promise of food. Trust erodes under the weight of hunger. Ration cards become symbols of power and subjugation, an obedience contract printed on paper. Those who comply receive food, those who resist face deprivation. The line between survival and loyalty blurs, forcing choices that haunt the soul. In the heart of the city, propaganda posters proclaim the virtues of loyalty and sacrifice. Images of well-fed soldiers juxtaposed against starving civilians serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of dissent. As food becomes a weapon, the government enacts measures to monitor compliance. Surveillance increases, and citizens live under the constant threat of being reported for any sign of disloyalty. Communities fracture under the strain of hunger. Families torn apart by fear find their bonds weakened, as the quest for food drives a wedge between kin. The very fabric of society begins to unravel. In the marketplaces, barter becomes a desperate attempt to survive. Food is traded for loyalty, and the value of human life is measured in rations. The economy of hunger thrives amidst chaos. Children, once innocent, now learn the harsh realities of survival. They witness the power dynamics of hunger, absorbing lessons of fear and compliance that will shape their futures. As the war continues, the government's grip tightens further. Food becomes a means of control, and the populace learns to navigate a world where every meal is a reminder of their precarious existence. Amidst the chaos, some begin to resist the oppressive system. Small acts of defiance emerge, as individuals risk everything to share food with those in need, igniting flickers of hope amidst despair. As fear continues to dictate actions, the question remains, how long can loyalty be sustained through hunger? The struggle for survival intertwines with the fight for dignity, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. In the shadow of war, bureaucracies flourish, crafting policies that mask the reality of starvation. High-ranking officials, cloaked in uniforms, convene in dimly lit rooms, discussing logistics with cold detachment, unaware of the human cost. As the war escalates, starvation is framed as a necessary tactic. Officials justify their decisions with charts and statistics, reducing lives to mere numbers, devoid of the suffering they represent. In the streets, civilians grow increasingly desperate. Children with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes wander through debris-strewn alleys, searching for scraps, their plight ignored by those who make the decisions. The disconnect between the decision-makers and the suffering populace widens. As food supplies dwindle, officials issue directives that further entrench the divide, prioritizing military needs over human lives. Amidst the chaos, some civilians try to document what is happening. A young photographer moves through narrow alleys, capturing the faces of the starving, evidence meant to pierce the fog of policy and show the world the reality behind the paperwork. As the bureaucratic machinery churns, the language of starvation becomes clinical. Terms like collateral damage and logistical necessity replace empathy, allowing officials to distance themselves from the consequences of their actions. In the heart of the besieged city, families huddle together, sharing meager rations. Their bonds strengthen in adversity, yet the looming threat of starvation casts a long shadow over their unity. The photographs begin to circulate, igniting outrage among some. Yet for many officials, the images are treated as noise, distractions from requirements, quotas, and resource management. Bureaucracy keeps moving, even as bodies thin. As the war drags on, the concept of accountability becomes diluted. Each order issued seems to absolve individuals of guilt, creating a culture where inaction is justified by necessity. The documenters persist, not because they expect immediate rescue, but because records are a form of resistance. They try to force accountability into a system designed to diffuse it. In the halls of power, debates rage over resource allocation, yet the human cost remains abstract. Officials argue over numbers, while the cries of the hungry echo faintly, drowned out by the machinery of war. Those who record the hunger realize the fight is not only about food, it is about exposing systems that make suffering procedural. The siege is physical, but the machinery behind it is administrative, and that machinery rarely stops on its own. In the shadow of relentless hunger, communities begin to fracture. Once tight-knit neighborhoods filled with laughter and shared meals now harbor suspicion and resentment. Families, driven by the instinct to survive, turn on one another, seeking to secure dwindling resources. As food becomes scarce, the moral fabric of society unravels. Acts of kindness are replaced by self-preservation. A mother, once nurturing, now hoards her last loaf of bread, fearing for her children's future, while her neighbor watches with envy. Children, once symbols of hope, now become reluctant participants in this moral decay. They learn to hide food from their friends, their laughter replaced by whispers of betrayal. Innocence is sacrificed on the altar of survival. The psychological toll of starvation deepens. People begin to rationalize their actions, justifying theft and deceit as necessary evils. A once respected elder, known for his wisdom, now resorts to begging, his dignity stripped away. In the marketplaces, once vibrant with trade, desperation reigns. Bartering gives way to violence as the scarcity of food ignites conflicts. Neighbors become rivals, and the bonds of community dissolve into chaos. Amidst the turmoil, leaders exploit the situation, pitting groups against each other to maintain control. Promises of food become weapons of manipulation, as trust erodes and fear takes root in every interaction. The once vibrant culture begins to fade, replaced by a grim survivalist mentality. Artistic expression is stifled, and creativity is sacrificed for the sake of sustenance. The community's identity is lost amidst the struggle for food. As the siege drags on, moral dilemmas become commonplace. A father, faced with the choice of feeding his starving child or sharing with a neighbor, grapples with guilt and desperation, his humanity slipping away. The community's shared history, once a source of strength, now becomes a weapon of division. Memories of past celebrations are overshadowed by the present's grim reality, as nostalgia turns into bitterness. Hope flickers like a dying flame. Some individuals, still clinging to their humanity, attempt to organize secret food-sharing networks, risking their safety to help others. Yet, their efforts are met with suspicion. The weight of starvation leads to an internal struggle. Individuals question their values, and the line between right and wrong blurs. Survival becomes a moral quandary, and compassion is often the first casualty. As the cycle of deprivation continues, the community faces a critical juncture. The choices made today will shape their future. Will they reclaim their humanity, or will survival extinguish the last remnants of compassion? As the last remnants of the siege fade, the city emerges from its shadows. Streets once echoing with despair now bear the weight of silence, where hungry eyes search for signs of life amid the rubble. In the aftermath, survivors gather to reclaim their lives, yet the specter of hunger lingers. Families huddle around makeshift tables, their hands trembling as they divide meager rations, each bite a reminder of their recent suffering. The scars of starvation run deep, yet the world beyond the city moves on. Outside, officials discuss recovery plans, their voices a stark contrast to the hushed whispers of those still grappling with trauma. Children, once vibrant and full of laughter, now tread cautiously. Their innocence has been replaced by an awareness of scarcity, as they navigate a landscape where food is both a blessing and a source of anxiety. The psychological toll of deprivation becomes evident. Neighbors, once united, now harbor suspicions. Trust erodes as the memory of hunger turns friends into competitors, each fearful of the next meal. As the city begins to rebuild, the absence of acknowledgement for past suffering creates a chasm. Leaders focus on infrastructure, while the emotional scars of the populace remain unaddressed, festering beneath the surface. In the shadows of recovery, those who suffered in silence find solace in shared stories. Gatherings form where memories of hunger are exchanged, a collective mourning that binds them together in their struggle. Yet, as the city reopens its doors, the past is relegated to whispers. The trauma of starvation fades into the background, overshadowed by the urgency of rebuilding, leaving deep-rooted pain unacknowledged. Amidst the chaos of recovery, some individuals emerge as advocates for the forgotten. They strive to bring attention to the lingering effects of starvation, pushing against the tide of collective amnesia. The struggle for recognition becomes a silent battle. Those who endured the siege find themselves caught between the desire to heal and the need to remember, as the world around them rushes to forget. As the narrative of recovery unfolds, the memory of starvation remains a ghostly presence. It lingers in the corners of homes and hearts, a reminder of what was lost and the fragility of peace. In this new chapter, the cycle of hunger is not yet broken. The lessons of the past fade quickly, leaving room for the same strategies to resurface. The future remains uncertain, with echoes of hunger still haunting. In the years following the Great War, nations grappled with the aftermath of conflict. The scars of starvation lingered, shaping policies and attitudes. Hunger became a tool of negotiation, wielded by governments seeking leverage over their adversaries. As the Cold War unfolded, food became a strategic weapon in geopolitical maneuvers. Blockades and sanctions were employed not just to weaken enemies, but to assert dominance. The specter of hunger loomed over nations, a silent threat. In the 1990s, the siege of Sarajevo illustrated the brutal efficiency of starvation as warfare. Civilians endured relentless deprivation, their resilience tested as they navigated a landscape of hunger and despair. The legacy of starvation tactics continued into the 21st century, with blockades in regions like Gaza and Yemen. Governments justified their actions, framing deprivation as a necessary measure, while the human cost remained largely invisible. Amidst these crises, international organizations struggled to respond effectively. Aid workers faced immense challenges, often hindered by bureaucratic red tape and political agendas. The cycle of hunger persisted, a grim reminder of human suffering. The psychological toll of starvation extends beyond the immediate crisis. Survivors grapple with trauma, their experiences shaping identities and communities long after the hunger subsides. Memories of deprivation haunt their lives. As nations confront their pasts, the moral implications of starvation as a weapon come to the forefront. Historians and activists advocate for recognition, urging societies to acknowledge the suffering inflicted by calculated deprivation. Despite the lessons of history, the mechanisms of hunger remain relevant. Modern conflicts continue to exploit food as a weapon, perpetuating cycles of violence and suffering. The specter of starvation lingers, a tool of control. The global response to hunger remains fragmented, with some nations prioritizing political agendas over humanitarian needs. The consequences of this neglect echo through generations, as communities struggle to rebuild amidst the ruins of deprivation. As the world grapples with the legacy of starvation, it becomes clear that hunger is not merely a weapon of war, but a reflection of deeper societal issues. The fight against deprivation is intertwined with the pursuit of justice. Ultimately, the weaponization of hunger reveals a chilling truth. It thrives in silence and obscurity. The absence of food is not fate, it is a decision. And because it leaves few ruins on the skyline, it is easy to deny, easy to delay, and easy to repeat. As we reflect on the history of hunger as a weapon, one warning remains. When food becomes leverage, humanity is already under siege. Starvation does not require hatred, only calculation. And wherever deprivation can be engineered, someone will argue it is strategy.